so pleased that Annie Brown has agreed to do this presentation and performance for us. Dr. Brown is a Howard University School of Social Work professor emerita. Since her childhood in Louisiana, she spent her whole life singing in choirs and is currently a member of the Episcopal Church of the Ascension in Silver Spring. I met Annie a few years ago when I joined a recorder group. They're little wooden instruments that play. In case you don't know. She played in it too. She already played in it when I joined. And I was instantly attracted to her warmth and intelligence and sense of humor. Spirituals have also always meant a lot to her. In fact, she has said that she considers them the soundtrack of her life. But they mean more than that to her. They represent a key element in African American struggle for freedom. She's here to celebrate Black History Month with us by sharing her in-depth knowledge about the role of spirituals in African American history. Thank you so much, Annie.
Thank you, Jackie. And thank you, Silver Spring Village and Sparkle. And thank all of you for joining us for this presentation. I'd like to make a few disclaimers. I'm not a professional, I'm not trained. This is something that just kind of sprang from an interest of mine. I was in a choir many years ago in an Episcopal church, and a young white woman in the choir, during Black History Month, we had gotten a spiritual, and she said something like, "Oh, I don't like this. It's too simple. And it's repetitive." And I was actually kind of stunned. And so I thought then I had a mission that whenever I was in a choir in any church, that I was going to make sure that spirituals became a part of the repertoire of the music of the church, and that our choir would sing spirituals. And I'm very lucky. I've been at Ascension for almost 30 years, Jennifer. I've been at Ascension, and the choir has always embraced spirituals and gospel, and I felt at home because I did not grow up Episcopalian. I grew up in the Baptist church, so I grew up closer to that kind of music. But my husband was an Episcopalian, and I joined him. And so I had to give up something to become a part of it. But I have been very lucky because I don't miss being in the church where I grew up, where I could sing the kind of music I like to sing. I like all kinds of music, don't mind me. I'm very eclectic in my taste. I'm one playing in the 60s that would play guitar and sing folk songs. So I would like to acknowledge a few people. I would like to acknowledge my choir. The choir I participate in, and a couple of members are here today, Marta and Jennifer, and you'll see them because we have choir clips. When Jackie approached me about doing this, I was very reluctant. I just didn't know how this was, because I didn't want to tape it, and I didn't know how you could have, I wanted some to feel alive, even though it's virtual. So I wanted to be able to read my lecture in person and have clips. And so my choir very graciously allowed me to share the clips with you. And I'm also joined in this endeavor by a former colleague of mine from Howard University, Dr. Fern Hunt, who was in the math department, but recently retired from the National Bureau of Standards. She's going to play and sing a number. And I think probably she, like me, just have an affinity for spirituals and want to see that music remain a part of who we are and what we do. I think it's an American treasure, not just for African Americans. And so let me move on. Oh, one thing I'd like to say, I grew up in the Jim Crow South. I was born in Louisiana. I was a person that put my money in the bus at the front and walked around to the back to get in. So and these are the songs I heard. When I say this was the soundtrack of my life, I mean, we woke up every Monday and Thursday morning, my mother's wash days. She always sang these songs, standing at the line, she along with other people in the neighborhood. You could walk through the neighborhood and hear people singing from their kitchen. They would be cooking or ironing. And sometimes people just walk down the street singing these songs. Nobody called the police, okay? This was something to be, that people expected and people did. Okay, I'm going to move on. The first part of my lecture, it's called The Enslaved, Strangers in a Strange Land. The origin of the spirituals is the humble lives and suffering of an enslaved people a long way from home. Coming from a culture that sang for every occasion, I would conjecture that the spirituals gathered some of their essence from the voyage to the New World in what is now called the Middle Passage. Some of the early spirituals came from such depths of despair and more aptly fitted W.E.B. Du Bois's description of them as sorrow songs. Sometimes captured in warring raids and sold to slave traders, sometimes kidnapped while foraging for food or performing rites of passage to manhood, stolen, all loaded on ships, human cargo stacked like kegs of rum, the stench from the living and the dead all around them. Those who survived the Middle Passage, when they reached the shores of South America, the Indies, and North America, were then placed in pens, fattened like cattle, and sold at auction to the highest bidder. They were purchased to work the farms and the plantations of the North and the South. They were strangers in a strange land. In the 1940s, the Social Science Institute of Fisk University participated in a works progress administration project that collected autobiographical accounts of their lives from ex-slaves. They produced 3 volumes of a manuscript entitled The Unknown History of Slavery. An example from one of those accounts that illustrate my thesis that spirituals may well have been the therapy for those enslaved. Listen to the following account from one of the slave narratives entitled Slaves Have No Souls. I remember seeing my old mother spinning with tears running down her cheeks, crying about her brother who was sold and carried to Arkansas. She would sing, "Oh, my good Lord, go down in the valley to pray to ease my troubling mind." And he continued, "Oh, where else can we go but to the Lord?" And there's actually a spiritual, it's called Where Can I Go? And where can I go? Oh, where can I go? Where can I go but to the Lord? The former slave went on to say, the young people don't live close to God now as they did in them times. God lived close to them too. Some of them old slaves composed the songs we sing now. God revealed it to them. Some of the songs from slavery, I am bound for the promised land. I'll never turn back no more. Come on, Mona, come on, Mona. Come on before the judgment day. Run away to the snowfield, run away to the snowfield. My time is not long. Moses smote the water and the children crossed over. Moses smote the water and the children crossed over. Moses smote the water and the children crossed over, and the sea gave way. But thinking of the ex-slave narrator's mother, a spiritual that came to mind was, for me, was, "Oh Lord, how come me here?" Now I'm going to sing a couple of verses a cappella, and I'm going to need to take a drink of water because talking and singing taxes my voice. Oh Lord, how come here? Oh Lord, how come here? Oh Lord, how come here? I wish I never was born. I wish I never was born. They stole my children, Lord. They stole my children, Lord. They stole my children, Lord. I, I wish I never was born. I wish I never was born. There were thousands of spirituals that we have never heard. They spoke to specific instances in the daily lives of individuals and the collective. Today, in this particular presentation, we are exploring spirituals from a religious and sociocultural perspective. My aim is to tap into the reservoir of the cultural and emotional history of the spiritual and convey the idea that this legacy, for some African slaves and African Americans, helped them to survive slavery and the Jim Crow racism and oppression of the post-slavery United States. We are all now very familiar with the conceptualization of post-traumatic stress. I wonder if you've ever wondered, how did these slaves deal with the trauma they faced every day? With the disappointment of gains made during Reconstruction snatched away in the ensuing decades of Jim Crowism. It is impossible to determine with certainty when the first spirituals were created. Most scholars speculate that these songs proliferated near the end of the 18th century and during the last few decades leading up to the end of legalized slavery in the 1860s. I say these songs started during the Middle Passage, the moaning of those snatched from their homeland. Many could not speak the same language, and so they moaned together. They made music together on the slave ships, bringing them to the Americas. The songs were not composed by any one individual and written down. They were the music of the people, the folk songs of an African people who were thought by the dominant population to be less than human and identified in the Constitution as 3/5 of a person. These songs expressed their humanity, buttressed their sense of community, and built their resilience. Despite the differences in the content and form of the music they created, all of the African communities from which slaves were captured placed functional music in some form at the center of their daily existence. In Africa, music was called on to mark and celebrate virtually every event in tribal life, no matter how insignificant. Daily routines of work, commerce, or social discourse, as well as major life events such as birth, marriage, or participation in war, were all framed and punctuated with singing, dancing, drumming, or other forms of active music making. The unique musical tradition created by the African slaves must be viewed as more than music, but also as an expression of the pathos, hope, and yearning for freedom of an oppressed people. They are the melding together of two cultures, the proud African tradition of music as the heartbeat of life, and the moaning life in servitude on plantations and farms and in urban homes of the wealthy. From the shores of Africa to the Middle Passage to the auction block, the emotions of a people are writ large upon the historical tapestry of their sojourn in this country. They were ever moving forward. And I'm going to ask you, I know we are muted and we must remain muted, but we can still have participation. Let us sing a couple of verses of We Are Climbing Jacob's Ladder. And I will kind of direct it so we're at least halfway together. We are climbing Jacob's ladder. We are climbing Jacob's ladder. We are climbing Jacob's ladder. Soldiers of the cross. Every rung goes higher, higher. Every round goes higher, higher. Every rung goes higher, higher. Soldiers of the cross. Okay, thank you. Give yourself a hand. Dr. Arthur Jones, a psychologist at the University of Denver and head of a spirituals project, gives a program called The Wisdom of the Spirituals. He speaks of the old Negro spirituals as the raw, fervent plantation songs that helped African Americans through slavery, emancipation, and Jim Crow. These songs are our heritage, a gift from our ancestors, a place to retreat to when the world is too much with us. But I suggest also that these songs were therapeutic and helped to heal the wounds, physical and mental, of first the slaves and later the victims of the Jim Crow system. And the next clip that we will hear, I'm singing A Balm in Gilead. Some call the spirituals the sorrow songs. And yes, they were that. But as we listened to Balm and Gilead, there was also hope. You could hear the sorrow in, "Oh Lord, how come me here?" But the spirituals covered a range of Black life and emotions. L. Jones in 1963 stated the most expressive music of any given period will be an exact reflection of what the Negro himself is and the kind of problems he suffers at that time. Martin of the Social Workers in Social Work and the Black Experience notes that the spirituals are the spontaneous expressions of the soul in search of comfort and escape from physical and mental turmoil. The early spirituals provide a sense of a cry straight from the heart. I'm going to share a few lines of not the spiritual. I don't know how many of you are familiar with meters. It's where people, it's a call and response, or you line out the first line and the congregation joins you. You find these songs in many of the rural Black churches of the South. When ministers are preaching, the congregation will sometimes give them a little assistance. And so someone will cry out a meter that goes like this. I know the Lord, he heard my cry. I know the Lord, he heard my cry and pitied every moan. And the congregation would respond. And then somebody might cry out, if I don't wake up in the morning, everything's all right. If I don't wake up in the morning, everything's all right. All my parents has to do is send them back to the States. These were the unadorned moaning songs, a cry from the heart. The spiritual sometimes express the loneliness and alienation of the oppressed, but they also express the deep religious faith and resilience. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child in times like these, I need the Lord. And now we're going to hear Dr. Hunt's rendition of, Jesus, are you listening? Do you hear me? Jackie, okay. Jesus is a listener all day long. Yes, he is a listener all day long. Jesus is a listener all day long. To his songs and their praise. Jesus is a listener all day long. Yes, he is a listener all day long. Jesus is a listener all day long. To his songs and their praise. That gospel train is a coming. Oh, thank you, Fern. And in the tradition of spirituals, Fern wrote the third verse. That was her verse. And this is what happened with spirituals. There's so many different versions of the same song, so many verses used in different places because people, it was song of the people, and they were not necessarily written down, and you could add to them and you could use them. And so I think it's great. Fern decided to write a third verse there. Spirituals functioned on many levels for the enslaved Africans. While the songs primarily expressed deeply held religious convictions, they also had deep longings for freedom. And so you all probably know Go Down Moses. I heard so many Exodus sermons when I was growing up, and we sang this song so much and so often, and we knew who the Pharaoh was. Okay, so I'm going to just sing just the chorus. Mm-hmm. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell oh Pharaoh to let my people go. The spirituals often mask in the form of secret codes or messages embedded in the lyrics of the songs. In addition to songs like these that often gave information about leaving, they often provided the organizational rallying call for revolts and insurrections. And there were a lot. We don't know about them. They didn't want to talk about them, but there were revolts and insurrections. We know about Nat Turner and Denmark Vesey, but there were many others. We know that the plantation owners recognized the power of drums to send messages, and drums were banned. So some of the songs became the way to convey certain information. Songs like Wade in the Water, Shall We Gather at the River, or a song like Steal Away. And Ascension's choir is going to be on this clip. As the country progressed along the road to democracy, the issues discussed were not lost on those enslaved. They had the same yearnings for freedom, to become educated, to own land, to prosper as any other Americans, but with few tools to effectuate changes in their lives. They could run away, and that they did. They could surreptitiously obtain knowledge, and they did. Some were lucky enough to buy their freedom, and they did. But what they had in abundance was hope, faith, and a vision for another kind of future, if not for themselves, then for their children. And so these sentiments are expressed in songs like, I've got a right to the tree of life. I'm going to sit at the welcome table. I know the Lord has laid his hands on me. I am somebody, I know the Lord. I know the Lord. I know the Lord has laid his hands on me. And people added verses, and you go on and sing that. These songs speaks to issues of resiliency and self-esteem. I am somebody. The Lord has laid his hands on me. But the spirituals also communicated information about behavior, calling each other to account. Sinner, get yourself together. Somebody's knocking at your door. It's me, it's me, it's me, oh Lord, standing in the need of prayer. And sometimes they showed a sense of humor. And there's one called Scandalize My Name. And I'm going to ask you to help with that. I'm going to sing. I met my sister just the other day, and I gave her my right hand. And just as soon as I turned my back, Lord, she scandalized my name. Do you call that a sister? I want you to say, no, no. Do you call that a sister? No, no. Do you call that a sister? No, no. She scandalized my name. So let's give it a try. I met my sister just the other day, and I gave her my right hand. And just as soon as I turned my back, Lord, she scandalized my name. Now, do you call that a sister? No, no. Do you call that a sister? No, no. Do you call that a sister? No, no. She scandalized my name. I met my brother just the other day, and I gave him my right hand. And just as soon as I turned my back, Lord, he scandalized my name. Now, do you call that a brother? No, no. Do you call that a brother? No, no. Do you call that a brother? No. He scandalized my name. So that's a fun one, and there were others. They were not always sorrowful. We're all familiar that there's spirituals that carry a sense of hope for the future and the promise of a better place. So let's sing a verse of Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, because I know this is one that we probably all know at least one verse of. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming forth to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming forth to carry me home. And then, I looked over Jordan, and what did I see? Coming for to carry me home, a band of angels coming after me. The overarching value placed on community welfare served to support and complement the principles of democracy that were also prominent in the songs. There was an egalitarianism expressed in the spirituals. The aforementioned, I'm going to sit at the welcome table, is a good example. Another example is Plenty Good Room. plenty good room in my master's kingdom. So you just grab a chair and sit down. You know, we're going to all be around that table. You may not include me while we're on this earth, but when we get to heaven, we're going to be around that table. But there were also, the choir is now going to sing, Ain't That Good News? The good news were for us too. At the end of slavery, many of the newly freed slaves wanted to forget about slavery, forget the old ways, the old days, the old songs. This was a new day. And they sang something like, no more auction block for me. 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 Many thousands gone. So the songs would commemorate. I mean, emancipation was wonderful. So there must have been thousands of songs celebrating emancipation. Now, in the 1870s, with the formation of the Fisk Jubilee Singers, the spirituals were given to the world. The singers were students and majoring in music, but they were being classically trained. And they started the tour singing classical music. But in performing spirituals as an encore, they found a voice for the spirituals, and people reacted to them. Audiences reacted in such a way that they really changed their programming and focused on the spirituals. They toured both nationally and internationally. In a sense, they turned to their heritage, the legacy of the spirituals, to raise money to save their school. Fisk was founded in the barracks left by the Union soldiers. They were cold, not very well constructed, but they started a college there. And they wanted to raise money. And so these students, and actually the conductor was George White, a white conductor, went on the road to earn money. They performed the spirituals in a performance style to grace the famous concert halls in the US, Britain, and Germany. They sang for Queen Victoria. But they did not just cater to white audiences in this country. They insisted on singing to integrated audiences. They would perform songs with subversive meanings and would not accept discriminatory treatment while on tour. I would suggest, if you really want to know more about the Fifth Jubilee Singers, there's a wonderful PBS documentary on the Jubilee Singers, and it tells you all about their struggles. It was difficult, but one of the things I learned, in addition to raising money to save their school, they ended up having to save the American Missionary Society. Some of the monies they raised on their World Jubilee Tour went to fill the coffers of the Missionary Society that had gone bankrupt. Now, some of you may be familiar with the American Missionary Society. They set up a lot of schools across the South. I myself went to an HBCU that was founded by the Methodists and United Church of Christ, and a part of the American Missionary Society. The eminent sociologist, Dr. E. Franklin Frazier, one of the founders of Howard University School of Social Work, was among the early Black professional social workers to believe that social workers could never grasp the situation of Black migrants until these social workers had some basic understanding of Black culture. He wrote that after reviewing case records during the 1930s, he was not able to get from these records data which threw light on the cultural situation. Frazier stated further that these records made only sporadic inferences concerning the migrants' inner lives, their attitudes, and conception of life. Frazier felt the key to understanding the Black migrants who left the South, those migrants that Isabel Wilkerson talks about in her book, The Great Migration, left the South in great numbers, moving to northern cities for jobs and a sense of dignity, was an understanding of folk culture as expressed in folk music, spirituals, and blues, and as structured in institutions such as the rural Black church. You see, I'm quoting social workers because I really look at the spirituals as therapeutic and had gotten interested in music therapy and using music. And I felt one way to connect with some older African Americans, if you were working in nursing homes or independent living situations, would be to ask them about this music. And if you can sing, and if you knew some, sing it with them. There was another time in our history that promoted a rebirth of the early spiritual forms, and that was the civil rights movement of the 50s, 60s, 70s. Songs such as "We Shall Not Be Moved," "Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Round" were heard at protest rallies and marches across the country. An example can be heard in this spiritual turned freedom song. You see, it was woke up this morning with my mind stayed on Jesus, and now it's freedom. Dr. Bernice Regan and the Freedom Singers of Albany, Georgia, epitomized the relationship between the struggle for civil rights, the movement, and the music. Understanding the spirituals in context helps to distinguish the repertoire from a style like gospel, which often uses spirituals as raw materials. Most surviving spirituals were probably from the early 19th century, rural in origin, and likely incorporated folk and hymn materials. Gospel, meanwhile, dates to the mid-19th century and stems from musical activity in urban churches and incorporated existing spirituals as well as popular tunes. In slavery times, spirituals were sung a cappella, but they evolved as a musical form. They were arranged, concertized, and now claim a space in the repertoire of classically trained African American musicians and others, and increasingly across the religious spectrum. Spirituals are the foundation for blues, jazz, and gospel. To really sing the spirituals is to feel them. To feel them is to know the truth about their origin and history, to get in touch with the association of ideas that surround them, and to realize something of what they have meant in the experiences of the people who created them, but also the contribution they have made to the development of music in this country. They provide a balm for the soul of America and all the peoples of this land, and an inspiration for modern composers. So I'm going to conclude this presentation with a couple of songs. One, a contemporary, I call it contemporary spiritual. It was an African-American composer, Moses Hogan. And he wrote this song, "Oh Lord, please hear my prayer." But it is so in the mode, tone, mood of spirituals. I call it a modern day spiritual. And then we will conclude the program with a popular gospel song that I think is rooted in spirituals. And that is Richard Smallwood's Total Praise. So here, oh Lord, hear my prayer. Okay, that concludes my presentation, and I think we're going to have some question and answer. I think. Thank you.
Oops, I need to unmute myself. There we go.
Yeah.
I always forget about doing that part. So I do have a couple of questions in chat, and then after we address those, we can do a raise your hand if there are additional questions, or you're welcome to continue putting them in chat. First, and you addressed this toward the end, Annie, but there was a question about the differences between gospels and spirituals.
Yeah, you know, there's a difference, and then there's not a difference. The spirituals really emanated more from the rural area, unadorned. Gospel includes spirituals. Spirituals really serve as the raw material for a lot of music, jazz, blues, whatever. It's just that I think I said in my presentation that somehow the music can reflect where you are, what time period is it, and so when people moved to the North, they wanted something new and something alive that was more expressive of the new place. And so that's where gospel kind of emanated. And even so, one of the Dorsey, you know, I did mention Precious Lord, that was written by Dorsey, but just music is this organic thing. People get together and make music. So it starts one way and it ends up incorporating everything and being something different.
Good.
So I think maybe we're just thinking in terms of maybe a time, and the spirituals were not so formalized. And we heard Jesus, Are You Listening? And she added a verse. That happened a lot with the spirituals.
Mm-hmm. Another question that's perhaps a little more philosophical. Why were people so deeply religious when it seems that their prayers were not being answered?
Well, I think that is subjective on the part of who's asking that question. I think people felt if you didn't have religion, you didn't have anything. I mean, you're here, cut off in a strange place, treated like animals. You've got to have something. You know, human beings are resilient, and we will find comfort. And so one of the things that I think that comes up ever so often, you know, Black churches really became the center for some of our civil rights activity. So I think people felt prayers were answered, maybe not in our time, but they were also thinking that prayers are going to be answered in God's time, and they may not be answered for me, but they'll be answered for my children. My mother was not able to go finish school because the school only went to 7th grade. She loved learning. She instilled that in us. She was a very religious person. And so she believed, and 9 of her children went to college. So we can't, prayers are answered on different levels. And there are so many families that have been able to overcome and persevere. I don't think we would say that prayers aren't answered. Maybe not, you know, exactly the way we want them, but we know that there's change. That change has come. That we've been able to sit at the welcome table. All right, a Black president at the state banquet. We're at the welcome table, sometimes whether we're wanted or not.
Amen. Another question that just popped in, do you do these kinds of presentations about song and history in schools?
Not really. You know, this is something that just, it started one year at the School of Social Work, and we were celebrating Black History, and I got 3 of my colleagues, we were both shared similar backgrounds, and got 3 of my colleagues together, and we had a quartet, and I did this. Okay, so I thought that was good. And you know, academicians are always looking for presentations. So one year I did a poster presentation at CSWE, Council on Social Work Education. I had my posters with all the information, and I would sing some songs when people came by. But mostly at Ascension. I just haven't seen myself as one of those, you know, the storyteller that goes around. But when an opportunity is presented, I will respond to the opportunity.
Good, good. Someone had asked earlier on about where copies of some of these pieces may be available.
You mean the songs?
Mm-hmm.
There's a Black hymnal, Lift Every Voice and Sing. And you'll find most of these songs in Lift Every Voice and Sing.
Yeah.
And that's, we use that in the Episcopal Church. And then there's another hymnal that's used in the Lutheran Church that will contain many of these songs. Fern, do you have any?
Well, yeah, I think that there's a hymnal from the Lutheran Church and also from the Catholic Church, Lead Me, Guide Me.
Yes.
Which actually has a lot of hymns. Although, Annie, you sung the first one, How Come Me Here, which sounds very, very old. And I don't think that's, I would love to have the music to that, or maybe sing it and then I'll pick it up. It's beautiful. And I've not heard that before at all.
I had not heard it before, except I heard Jesse Norman and Kathleen Battle did a CD of spirituals,
Mm-hmm.
and they sang that. Kathleen Battle saying, How Come Me Here.
Okay. Wow.
So I'm going to put in the chat also, there is a, I'm actually a professional singer too, and there is a site that's available online of spirituals that are in the public domain. So they were all printed before 1925. And the thing that's really nice about this site is that you can purchase the music if you like. It's usually $1 or $2. But it also links to a YouTube survey of different performances of those particular pieces. So it's the Tuskegee Singers, all of these things. It's a really great resource. So I will just.
And are you putting it in chat?
I am, yep. There we go. It's in there. Are there other questions? I think at this point we can just do a hand raise, just wave at me and unmute yourself. Patricia?
Yeah, let's see. Yeah, unmuted. I was just noticing that my church, Foundry United Methodist, they're having a panel discussion led by our choir director, Stanley Thurston, about whether some uses of Black music and spirituals in mostly white churches is a form of cultural appropriation. I don't think Stanley would think that it was, considering that he incorporates them in our services a lot. But I just wondered if you had any comments about that, or if you had heard anybody express any kind of concern about that.
Well, I can just say, I don't have any concern about that. I want everybody singing these songs because I think they speak to all of us. And we have been, left out of American history, and I want us in American history. And so I want to come with everything, our music and our spirituals. And I think it's great, because I think then you'll begin to understand, we'll begin to understand each other.
Great. Other questions, other hands? Let me just scroll through. It's a very quiet audience today. Barbara, don't forget to unmute.
Somebody, yeah. Barbara.
Fern.
You'll have to unmute.
Barbara, somebody named Barbara is raising her hand.
Barbara, unmute. Okay, we'll go to Kay.
I have a question. You referred early on to the trauma of being enslaved. And somehow, I don't know why, I'd never thought about that, but it's it's a huge question. Can you refer me to books, or just, I would like to learn more about that, and about the idea that the spirituals were a way of dealing with trauma is a very powerful idea. And just in general, how did generations of enslaved people, how did they do it?
That's how they did it. I mean, people would sing. I just think of my relatives, people I know. My mother, she had 9 children, few resources, but she always would sing these spirituals. I know the Lord will make a way. I want Jesus to walk with me. Those were really songs that people sang that I'm sure at the same time was healing them. Now, you see, it totally escapes me. And if you leave some information, there is a book out that someone has written about the trauma, the slave syndrome. It's called I wish her name could come to me. I can't think of it right now. But she really conceptualized this whole idea of trauma. And when you think about it, it makes sense. People were beaten in front of people. Children were beaten in front of children. Children were snatched away. And so these were people with feelings. What do they do with it? And, there's some understanding now that this can be passed through the genes, that that it is still with us, that it takes on a biological nature, so that some of the issues that we may be dealing with, not everybody ascribes to that theory, but when you understand what happened to people, and we know how we look at what happens to people now, we've got to understand that trauma was there. And people are beginning to write about that. And I'll maybe with Jackie, I'll send something. I'll send the name of the book to Jackie.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Annie, there was another question about if you'd like to say anything about the role of spirituals, particularly during the Underground Railroad period.
Oh, well, yes. I mean, people use music and spirits to tell them where you're going to be when you wade in the water, or you're going to meet at the river. Those go down Moses. I think Harriet Tubman used music in that way, in terms of bringing people out, and she was called Moses. So I think it just happened as a natural part of living, part of life, part of being. You couldn't use drums, so you talked about steal away. It didn't say exactly, I'm going to be at this, but you may sing this song at this time and we're leaving. So the spirituals played a role in every aspect of life.
She'll be coming around the mountain. We had a dispute about this. Is it a spiritual, or is it sort of a bastardized spiritual, or anyway, do you know?
I'm sorry, I don't know anything.
That's okay. And I think one of the more difficult things to realize too is, if there's one thing that the white masters might have admired, is this sort of, and the command performances or whatever, but the very soulful, very beautiful music that that their own slaves were able to share. And I'm sure they didn't share all of them, but I mean, there's a lot of references in plantation records and things, or letters and things about the beautiful music.
Yeah, and really, the slaves played a lot of the music for whites. I mean, when you think about country music, I don't think people recognize the influence of African Americans through country music. Some of the very early, the banjo came from Africa, and some of the early country music folks were African Americans. But when people started recording, they refused, the companies would not record African American country singers. They wanted them to sing blues, rhythm and blues, and that kind of thing. But Rihanna Giddens has done some research and work on the role of Black Americans in country music. And there was some trading between groups.
Mhm. Other comments, questions? I see other hands. Let me just take we've got 2 pages of people.
Okay, someone put the book in, the one I was talking about.
Oh, right, post-traumatic.
Okay, post-traumatic slave syndrome. That's it. That's the one I was trying to remember, and it just wouldn't come to me.
All right, any other questions? Going, gone. Great, I think that's everything. Thank you so much. This was a fascinating presentation. Thanks for sharing your musicality, but also your insights about this very characteristic American songbook that is really so culturally important to all of us. We really appreciate that.